everyone. Thanks for joining Christine and I today. And just a quick introduction, as Lucy said, I am a sales lead here at ChannelAssist, and I've been responsible for working with all kinds of companies from SMB space to Fortune 100s on engagement incentive programs. And in my past life, I've also been that channel sales rep who has run into things like confusing programs or not getting paid on time, and it's very frustrating. So I'm excited to get into this topic. And actually, just before I jumped onto this webinar, I read something from Forrester, and 51% of channel partner owners and sales reps have deferred from actually participating in vendor programs because of the nature of it not being easy to understand, or it's confusing, or the ability to track goals and promotions is just non-existent. So we're really excited to get into the topic. And before we do, I'm going to let Christine quickly introduce herself and we'll get right into it. Christine?
Thanks, Paul. So hi, everyone. I'm Christine Stiles. I'm Director of Sales Enablement at ChannelAssist, and I have been running and developing and expanding and growing programs for sales incentives and enablement my entire career. And never did I think I would say that I would be excited to talk governance and compliance, but I am, because far too often I hear the fear in people when we talk about these topics and we work with them on their programs. And really, they're fearful of the unknown. They're fearful of the work. They're fearful of the audit and then dealing with the consequences of those types of things. And way too often, they bring baggage from other experiences, whether it be Paul's experience as a sales rep or someone's experience where they got caught by the audit or the brand police. And really, what I like to tell them first is you're not alone. And that's why a lot of you are on this webinar with us as well, because these are the fears that we all bring into these type of programs. And the great news is that, these fears are often overcome by a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of planning. And we work with leaders in these areas every single day to be able to make sure that they're putting their best foot forward and they're not having consequences after the fact. The bad news is governance and compliance actually goes beyond tax and legal. That's the first thing we all go towards. And so one of the things that Paul and I are going to cover today is what we call the 3 tiers of governance and compliance when it comes to channel programs, incentive programs, channel engagement programs. And for us, the 3 tiers are program governance, internal compliance, and tax and legal governance. So that's what we're going to focus on today, getting you started. And of course, put the questions in the chat based on where you're at, what you need. And Paul and I are available after this webinar and beyond to be able to support you as well. So, Paul, let's get, started on this exciting topic.
We'll try to make it exciting.
Exactly.
No, I appreciate that. And we're also going to provide some information with the recording in terms of those 3 topics that Christine just mentioned. So there will be some takeaways as well. So we are going to do something a little bit different, as Christine just said. I think all of us are a little bit fatigued with webinars and long-formed, Zoom meetings. So we're going to do a quick hit webinar, and we're going to do a number of these in an upcoming series. So again, we're excited to do that, and we're going to cover one topic. So we're going to spend 15-20 minutes talking about some of the things we hear most often. But again, put your questions in the Q&A. And that's where we would love to provide you some actionable insights, some things to consider, whether you're, an organization's thinking about starting a program, or your program's matured to a point where, you're scaling globally and you have some burning questions or some concerns or fears that you want answered. So we're doing something a little bit different, and we're looking forward to seeing the outcome. So the first piece here that we want to talk about before getting into your questions is, why should you care about compliance, and why is it worth the hassle? So think about going off of what Christine just said about what governance and compliance really means within your program. Think about it as the foundation to the house that you're building. Without this, you're bound to run into a number of challenges, including delays from program adoption with your partners. So if partners don't understand what the objective or the vision of your program is, or if your incentives are not tightly aligned with their goals as well as yours, it'll be very difficult to get traction. You'll also start running into things like lost sales opportunities because of this, lower adoption rate. And again, if reps and partners find it difficult to participate, or they're afraid in terms of the consequences of brand compliance or complying with tax, you're going to miss out on a lot of market opportunity. So what we hear quite often from current clients is something very specific, and that's ad hoc programs. So your business might be running all kinds of different activities across either globally or even just in your local market, different business units running different programs at different times, making it very challenging to measure an ROI across campaigns and promotions. So the first thing that we want to talk about, and I'll let Christine kind of tie it back to the governance compliant piece, is all about eliminating ad hoc programs. So Christine, what would you say the first thing is about how you can start tying governance and compliance to ad hoc, or starting to eliminate your ad hoc programs?
Sure. So the first thing that in terms of governance is you've got your brand governance and compliance, right? So if you're running all these different ad hoc programs, they're going to have different brands, they're going to have different terms, they're going to have different delivery methods. So when you're planning these, your go-to-market strategy, really one of the things that we suggest is you have an overarching brand. That's way, first tick on the branding police controls is, are you brand compliant? The second thing is that you can take the terms and conditions, and all these different initiatives have some core terms and conditions that you want to set in place. So this is who's eligible, how are they segmented, do they need to register? Does the partner need to register before a rep? You can take all these core elements and ensure that there's consistency. The reason that consistency is also good in terms of the outcomes you get from there is your reps and your influencers and your stakeholders in these various programs, they have one place to go. They have one set of rules to go against, and you can ensure that those are in place. And then with segmentation or special campaigns under this marketing umbrella, you can have subsets of governance. So let's say you have a program that's for channel incentives. You may have some of your initiatives targeted at sales reps, and you want them to sell certain things. You may have certain initiatives targeted at sales engineers, or you may also have governance by different countries. So this allows you to take that overarching piece, everyone's on the same playing field, tick that governance box, and then you can have subsets related to, privacy laws, or related to how taxation happens. And it makes it easier for your partners and their reps and their influencers and their sales engineers to know what's expected of them. But also you're ticking the boxes on your internal governance as well. So when those audit police come knocking, you have a very clear and concise way of that you're operating your program. And then last but not least, your legal team has one set of rules to review. You go through that process once up front, and then from a taxation perspective, you're collecting that in one spot. So for instance, in the US, a 1099, a company can only issue one of those against an SSN number. Whereas in, say, the UK, you have to pay the pay tax up front, or in some countries, you can't pay the rep at all. So you have to pay the reseller, and then they put it on payroll. So these are the types of things, by doing those things up front, you tick those boxes, you make your life easier, and you do it once. So those are the things that we like to put our clients through up front with our how process, our hyper onboarding process. Bring all the stakeholders in at front and go from there. So those are just some of the things that you can do to alleviate those fears, tick those boxes from governance and compliance once, and not have to do it each time you do an ad hoc program.
And I think we've all run into, especially if you're running a business unit, that you have an idea or you have a goal in mind. If you don't have this centralized program, your speed to market gets drastically impacted because you got to jump through all the hoops internally, getting legal buy-off, negotiating internally. And to your point, Christine, when you have a standard set of rules, a standard set of terms and conditions, everyone's playing by the same game, you can get your initiatives to market much faster. And the Incentive Research Foundation has done so much research on this, and maybe it's something we can share after this webinar with the recording. But over 30% of the top performing technology vendors who centralize their program and have a strong set of governance rules and terms and conditions drive revenues upwards of 25% higher than their competitors. So it's some good information.
And Paul, just to add to that, I don't want the audience to think that we're saying that, governance and rules and compliance are one size fits all. That's definitely not what we're promoting here. We're sharing that there's certain rules that are going to happen. Like tax rules exist. None of us have any control over them. And they change by country and region and the nature of what you're paying out or what you're doing. But also, like a business unit, we also recognize that business units have different priorities, different outcomes they're driving, different ways that they sell. And by having this core and then doing these supplementals on promotions or special initiatives or special groups through segmentation, you can actually have those things in place that govern those sub activities as well. So you're not losing, you're not blending the lines across everything. You're just taking the core, doing that once, and then adding the details to ensure that those extra compliance or those extra business needs are addressed to drive those specific outcomes. You're not going to spiff a unit of product the same way you might spiff an influencer, or you might control or govern a co-sell incentive that you're doing. They all have nuances that do need to be addressed and accommodated, but the core can be addressed up front, and you only have to do that once.
Absolutely. Good point.
Yeah, and the other thing is we have some examples, in our history for sure, where companies were running these ad hoc promotions, and when we centralized them, what happened is these rules made it very clear, and it made it less friction in go to market, more speed to go to market. And one of our clients was running 3 or 4 of these, just within their US market as an example. And when we brought those together, instantly, within the first 6 months of the program starting, they saw a 20% increase in the level of participation, the level of incentives, and they also saw that reflected in their revenue activities, their pre-sale, their post-sales activities as well, because the reps had one space to look at. They had one set of rules with some nuances to only address. And, the other programs had been running for 5, 6, 7 years, and all we did was brought it together in one central place and smoothed out that rule and that participation process. And they saw that impact right away.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. And again, it goes back to, we're trying to make this an exciting topic, but it is really the foundation of all programs. So we're before we jump into everyone's questions, back to what you originally talked about, Christine, there's those 3 pillars that we talked about: program governance, internal compliance, and tax and legal governance. So maybe we can elaborate a little bit on those 3 areas, and then we can jump into some questions.
Sure. So the first one is program governance. So as I was just talking about, one of the things that we like to do is upfront, when someone's launching or refreshing or expanding their program, is using what we call is our, how workshops, bringing those stakeholders in, whether they be program, sales, brand, finance, bringing those people in up front, because what really program governance is it talks about, the terms and conditions. It talks about, who's responsible for what. It talks about, how you're going to segment it. Are you segmenting it by country? Are you segmenting it further by different, partner types or partner qualifiers? Are you bringing in, in the new go-to-market ecosystem, influencers and companies doing your renewals? Are you bringing those into the program? And then even once you look at the sales team itself, you have sales managers, sales engineers, sales reps, all of those different audiences. You need to treat them a little bit different, because the way they contribute to your wins and losses can be very different, and sometimes their priorities. So a sales rep's priority may be on revenue, where sales managers may be on margin, and we often see those conflicts. So with these programs, you have the ability to set those governance and compliance a little bit different for those different audiences. And then also bringing these decisions up front, there's also decisions, how do you deal with exceptions? Whether it be an exception, that someone has a split PO in a sale, whether it be an exception where, you want to bring a renewal earlier in the process. And so you want to make sure that people understand what happens when things go right, and how do you deal with when things go wrong. So that's all part of your program governance, and who can make those decisions, and what the rules are. Then you have internal governance. So we touched a little bit on, brand compliance. That's something that we're all used to. But what happens when your program grows? What happens when you need to go to that next level of signing authority to get your reward dollars covered, right? That's often something that people run into, and it delays their payouts to the reps and or to the influencers or the renewal partners, whatever those might be. And as a result, that rep loses confidence, or that organization loses confidence in your program. So having those set up front, you ensure that you can navigate that success, that growth, as a perfect example. You also want to be able to ensure that all parties within your organization are familiar with the program, that their questions are answered up front, that they know that you're ticking all the boxes so they won't have a consequence down the road, so that you don't have multiple 1099s going out there, or you cover off the pay tax in the UK, and that you address that different regions have different requirements and cultural preferences. So those are all the things that by doing that up front, you build advocacy, you build confidence, you build process in your program. And one of the simplest ones that we often hear is around, validation. So validation of a sales behavior, validation of a sales claim, validation of, a growth incentive, those type of things. And if you do those all up front, then you know what's going to happen. So as when Paul mentioned speed to market, then you have the ability to do speed to market because you already know what you're going to do. And it's just an exercise of, building the creative, sending out the communication, marketing it effectively, and getting those advocates working for you. So those are the types of things in in internal compliance that you can do. Perfect example, had a client who feared the audit police. So she had it where the audit police would visit her program every single year because it was a high profile program. And she would spend 2 or 3 days just being grilled by them, having to deliver articles and proof and everything. And it was a very stressful moment for her. So what we did as part of her support there was we proactively put together a document and put together proof articles and examples of reports and visibility and ROI and things like that, so that when the audit police showed up at her door knocking, she simply sent them this asset, and she never heard from them again, because it wasn't a case where they had to hunt for it, or they thought she didn't know or we didn't know as her support team, but it caused that pain point, that fear, that anxiety, that waste of time to go away for her. So those are just some examples of program compliance and knowing and planning and how they can address there. Then we have tax and legal compliance. Again, getting legal involved, stage one, using what you have now, don't reinvent it. Their terms, their phrases, their snapshots in legalese within your organization that they're accustomed to seeing, take advantage of those. In terms of taxes, knowing where the taxes are coming from, collecting that tax ID or putting it into your terms and conditions up front saves you a lot of work afterwards. We often have companies saying, oh, I don't want to deal with tax up front. If someone gets to, the X number of dollars, or their incentive is over the threshold, we'll deal with it then. Well, that doesn't work. You need to capture it up front, or you'll always be chasing someone. Like, everyone wants to avoid the tax man if they can. So those are the types of things that we see in terms of taxation, that can be dealt with up front, and with the right bit of knowledge can be handled as well. So Paul, what other things are you hearing from teams out there that are around these three tiers, that we should share with the audience?
Yeah, one that I wanted to touch on is, for all the program owners out there, the people who are responsible for making sure that these programs get to market and are successful. Christine, to your point on dealing with finance or legal, wouldn't it be nice to have less friction internally in dealing with those teams? And there are so many channel incentive management tools out there. What I would say as a piece of advice is really define what your objectives and the vision is of this program, or of what you want to achieve. And by doing that, it'll help you first of all identify which tool is best for you. But these tools are so sophisticated nowadays that when you have this centralized in place, going to legal and going to finance and showing them, you're collecting data up front, you're getting permission from attendees, all of these different pieces that, these boxes are checked, just makes your life that much easier. So to Christine's point, gathering all of this up front before you go live is imperative, and it'll change everything in terms of the success of your program. So that's probably the biggest thing I hear from program management owners or program incentive owners.
Yeah, and I mean, avoidance isn't the answer, right? A lot of the time we hear, oh no, we don't want to bring finance into this call, or we don't want to bring legal into this call, or things like that up front, because we don't want to have to deal with that, right? And I would say that never works, right? A lot of these groups, their response comes from almost a point of disrespect, right? Where they just want to be part of the process because they too have fears. They don't want to have to deal with it after the fact. So if you bring them in, they're part of the process. And, we know what they're going to ask for. We can answer on your behalf, with what they're looking for, and address what they're looking for. So you don't need to translate it, because often there's a difference of opinion, or there's a political play that comes into, these teams working together. And we found that often having that little bit of knowledge can be that bridge, and just showing them the respect up front, and, coming to them with a solution, or taking away their concerns and addressing them up front before they find out and have to deal with it afterwards. So, much like as program owners have fears, these other teams have priorities and fears as well, that, hyper onboarding or workshopping up front to address, all these compliance and governance issues, can go a long way in making it smooth, in your smooth to market, and as well as, getting your program promoted and advocated within your organization and beyond.
Absolutely. And how awesome would it be to get approvals faster? Your CFO
Oh
and your
yeah.
legal team.
Oh yeah, if you're using their language, like grab a past program, grab what they had as the terms and conditions, throw those clauses like, we have the right to modify at any time, throw in that, California Act or the, privacy policy from from Europe, right? Throw those in up front and it'll go a long way in terms of, getting that out there and recognizing that these things are important. I mean, privacy right now is huge. That's a huge governance topic, right? And for many of us, privacy is, how is my identity being used? How am I being communicated? Am I getting spammed? But it actually goes way beyond that with a channel incentive program. It can be also, like, where's the server for that particular region? There's certain countries that you have to have the server in their region. It can't sit in, if you're expanding a US or Canada program into the rest of the world, it can't sit in the US. It can't sit in Canada. It has to sit in those other regions. And some of those compliances are things that can haunt you and cost you money and cost you confidence in your program as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good points. So I think we want to get into some questions and answers. Does that work for you, Christine?
Sure.
Make sure that we can cover some things off for people and make sure it's all about the audience. Again, we're trying something new, so we want these to be quick hits with some takeaways or some actionable insights that everyone who's listening can actually get working on right away with their programs. So, Lucy, I'll turn it over to you, and if there's a couple of questions, we're happy to answer them.
Yep, we do have some questions. First of all, what a great discussion. Thank you guys so much. So the first question we have is, how do I deal with different country reward requirements?
That is a very popular one. So we are often seeing, big and small companies that are looking to do channel incentives around the world with a single program, a single brand. We're definitely seeing that with the large enterprise clients, and we're also seeing that with, the up and comings, the smaller ones where this is their first experience. So it is a very great question. So in terms of, taxation in Canada and US, it's very straightforward. Basically, there's a threshold that on an annual basis, if you pay out, meaning the participant receives that money over the certain threshold, then you have to issue them a tax slip. 1099s, it's one tax slip in the US, it's one tax slip for social security number. And these are taxations on the individual receiving it. In terms of business, there isn't taxation that you need to apply if you're paying the reps via the partner organization and their payroll. But if you are sending it direct to them, which is what we highly recommend, because that's where you get your biggest impact on engagement and motivation. But then you have in Canada, you can send out as many T4As to an individual as you want. So you don't have those same things. In terms of, other parts of the world, as I mentioned earlier, UK as an example, there's what's called a pay tax. So you need to address those things up front before you pay the rep. So there's different ways that you can apply that within your program. So the biggest thing is know what those differences are so you can be compliant. The second thing is have them addressed in your terms and conditions. Make sure that you engage those regions in those decision makings because they're dealing with them locally. And also, when it comes to your program, there are certain things in different regions, and I know Paul and I talk about this all the time, is different. There's different cultural. So it goes beyond the rules and regulations to there's some compliance that you need to do from a cultural perspective as well. So the types of reward preferences, the types of payout preferences, the types of, partner management engagement preferences, those are some things that also fall into those considerations when you're going to different countries that you may not be part of. And last but not least is that some of these rules and regulations, when it comes to taxation specifically, is there are often times where your organization needs to be present or have an identity in those countries as well. So those are the types of things when we talk about doing your due diligence up front, that those come into play, because there are ways that if you don't have those positions and you can't pay the reps, there are ways that you can pay them via the partner, or you can gauge them using points, or gifting, or running travel incentives to end up in a president's club that can allow you to still get that engagement by being compliant as well.
And it sounds daunting, but there's ways to, again, address this. And back to the point of this being, governance and compliance being, think of it more as a competitive advantage, right? By enabling these activities, and we've said this a couple of times already, but bringing all of this discovery up front, understanding the marketplaces you want to get into, what you want to get out of your program, it gives you a competitive advantage. And a number of our clients who follow these best practices of gathering this data up front and understanding their program compliance and governance has enabled them to really hit the ground running in the marketplaces that they run their programs in.
And the other thing I would add there, Paul, is that, we're in a modern time, right? Like gone are the days where you can run these programs on spreadsheets and emails and flyers and floor walks and things like that. So the tools that you choose are also very important, because, you want to make sure that when the person logs in, that they're only seeing the rules and regulations that are specific to them. They don't have to dig through 500 countries of rules or taxation. That if something isn't eligible in their country or their region or their role, that goes away, right? Like we don't want to have that, like as simple as you don't want to have the conflict between a sales rep and a channel or a sales manager. You don't want Germany to know that UK is getting an incentive, right? Or getting more of an incentive because you have to pay the pay tax. So those are the types of things where these tools can also allow you to tick those governance and compliance boxes, even as simple as language or privacy laws or servers. Those things, the proper tools are really key to doing that. And what that also does is it really streamlines the resources that you need internally as well to operate these programs, right? It's covered by the system, it's covered by the upfront activities, so that they can, really do what they do best, marketing a program or selling a product. If you have these in a tool and have them segmented and you have them done up front, you don't have to spend the cycles of your inbox of complaints or dealing with issues. It's all done in that infrastructure that you've built, that foundation of that house that you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Great. Awesome. Lucy, any other questions?
Yes, we have two more. The second one is, you guys mentioned something earlier about centralization of the program. Our business unit runs all kinds of different programs and incentive globally. How can I centralize with so many different needs, such as language, privacy, terms, and content?
Well, the good thing is I think we did answer some of that already, but I think it comes back down to, in this case, Christine just mentioned there's all kinds of different tools, and I mentioned that as well. Just make sure that based on where your programs are running, the scale of your solution, do your homework on the channel incentive management tool that can best provide you the ability to segment and personalize that incentive offer on a single solution, so that you can then have that one-stop shop for language translation, from making sure that the terms and conditions and privacy laws are all unique to that specific partner and to that specific geography or region.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I would share with this individual is that it's okay to let your regions be different, right? If
Yeah.
you try and collapse them into one item, you are going to get more pushback, and you're never the ad hocs are never going to go away. They're just going to find other ways to bypass you as the global program owner or supporter. So you really want to embrace those differences, find those foundations, and then address the individual needs so that you're respectful and you're addressing their business unit requirements. Because whether it be the business unit, whether it be the region, whether it be who they're targeting, those nuances are really important that you allow them to use those. Now, of course, if someone's doing something that is completely compliant, like I remember the days where we had a stack of gift cards in our pocket or in our desk, and you'd go on a floor walk and you'd hand them out based on sales, right? That something like that may not be something that you want to perpetuate, but there are ways that you can use with, digital gift cards or Instacards or things like that, that person can still go through that act, but you have it centralized through your system. So you have tracking, so that you have visibility that it was for something sales, that you have the tax coverage, all those. You don't want them to change their processes. You want to just bring them in so that when someone gets audited, it's not a question of where it went. It's a question of, that it's tracked, that it's compliant, that it's, in line with your brand as well. So, those are the other things that I would say in bringing centralization. Don't make it a box. Give them the options to take that box and have it reflect what their business environment is.
Couldn't agree more.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, we have one final question. Okay, they ask, we are finding a bottleneck in our claimant and validation process for reward payouts. How can I make this easier?
That is a very common question.
It is.
That is, we're paying out money. We don't know what it's doing. We don't know where it's going. We just know we're paying it and we feel trapped, right? So that is definitely something we hear a lot of. This is also one area where you get pushback from your channel field teams as well. So I would say, we had an example of a client where when they came to us, they were running ad hoc programs. And when the results came in ad hoc from different partners that they were running it with. And then they had to go through the process of having each one validated. And then they had to have each one paid out. And it took it from a timeline, that was reasonable to reps weren't getting paid out for 6 months. And then if there were issues, it took another 6 months to get them paid out. So in terms of the claiming and the validation, there's no two organizations that are the same in terms of their requirements, but there are some foundational activities that you want to do, right? So you need to define, what does eligible look like? What's the proof of performance? So proof of performance for a transactional sales claim will be very different than proof of performance for a co-sell activity or an influencer activity or renewal activity. So you want to make sure that those are the types of things that you define, in these different types of offers, so that you know how they're going to claim. So tools are great for setting claim forms that are specific to that task or activity, ensuring that that claim form has the ability for them to do, attach a piece of proof of performance. And then also, in some cases, take a look at how you need to validate it. Do you need to do serial numbers, or is a sales invoice enough? Does it need a gatekeeper? Does your sales team need to validate that that co-sell happened? So these are all the things that a tool and the right processes put in place can allow you to eliminate that bottleneck, because you're not figuring it out on the fly, or you're not, throwing claim validation into, the 700 other tasks that your marketing team needs to do, right? You can have a validation team with a company like us. We can do your validation and really get that bottleneck down. So the company that I was speaking to earlier, they went from paying out 6 months to the year, where the rep was like, oh, great, yeah, thanks for getting my money, who knows what it was for, to it collapsed down in their case, because of some of their other controls, to 30 days. So, they took 5 months off what they were paying their reps, and their program skyrocketed because the reps had confidence, the teams internally had confidence, they could communicate out, and then they were also doing the governance, because before that they hadn't done taxation. In this case, it was in Canada. They hadn't been filing taxes, and the fees that they were paying to the Canadian government for when they got caught were enormous. They were almost bigger than their program itself. So those are the types of things that eliminating this bottleneck from a operational standpoint was also saving the money too.
And I remember when I was, my past life when I was a rep, and the programs that were just easy to understand, it was all about a predictability for me. And I think I speak for a lot of people, that I've talked to as well, is that when you can increase the momentum of how much I get paid and how often I get paid, or how often you can get money into your seller's hands, it just builds that confidence quarter over quarter, and increases that adoption from your sellers. So you want to remove as much barriers as possible from sellers selling more often and faster for you. So it all starts with the governance and compliance piece.
Yeah, and Paul, you bring up a very good point there, in the sense that, governance and compliance, unless it's like legally required, like taxation and legal, you really need to evaluate whether or not that rule brings value to you as an organization. Does it cause too much friction for the person that you're trying to motivate? Because serial numbers are great, right? A serial number is unique. It identifies a specific unit, but sometimes reps don't have access to that. It doesn't come across to them. And so when you ask them to submit a serial number, you're creating a burden. And especially if it's a $2, a $5, a $10 spiff, does that have value to them? It has value to your organization. It has value to your auditors in an ideal situation, but you could actually be losing out on a sale or an activity to your competitor simply because you're asking for a serial number that is difficult for a rep to obtain. So sometimes you look at it and say, okay, we've been running these type of initiatives for 10 years, as an example. How many times have we found ones where someone shouldn't have got paid? Maybe it's a case where you ask for very little upfront, or you automatically process a certain level of claim, and you have audit queues that are down the road, or you have audit thresholds. So sometimes there's nuances that we can do in governance to eliminate those bottlenecks, but still have your organization protected as well. So you have to see where you're impacting the success of your program. And if there's alternative ways, you can tick those governance and compliance boxes that may not be as, I need a serial number on that, that mouse, or I need a serial number on that widget, or we have to make sure that someone has, their subscription stayed live for 6 months. You need to decide what you're incenting on. Are you incenting on the act of selling? Are you incenting on the sale? Are you incenting on the refresh? all those different things, you can apply different governance and the level of that governance and compliance depending on the nature of it and often your history with those partners as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an art too, right? How much opportunity, how difficult do you want to make it for people to participate, and how much do you want to protect yourself? So there is definitely a fine balance of maximizing engagement and sustaining excitement in your channel, and then also being too conservative and providing too many barriers and restrictions to validating sales. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's really important in today's cultures, right? You know, and it varies different cultures around the world, the level of restriction. But like, you know, I know where we are, you know, it can only take one missed payment or one slow payment for a rep to just take a look at the competitor's program, right?
Yeah, the average rep is participating in 6 different programs. So
yeah. So
you
want to make sure that they are happy with yours, and then even better advocating it and doing those initiatives there. So, you know, that's where doing this legwork up front, setting expectations that are reasonable and relevant up front can go a very long way in an almost being like, we always talk reps are, you know, coin operated, but making your program feel coin operated. You know, to start, I sell this brand, I get this reward. I sell this brand, these are the 5 steps I need to take, and I get my money automatically. And at the end of the year, yeah, I get a tax slip, but, you know, welcome to, you know, sales incentives, right? So those are the types of things that you really have to consider. And this is exactly why people are fearful of it. We've now spent, you know, 40 minutes talking about all the nuances that you need to do. And yes, you know, they are things that you can put up front, but it's work, but with the right foundation, it's work that's easy to do. And you don't need a, you know, a team of lawyers and a team of auditors and a team of all this to run your program. You need the right rules, the right tools, the right monitoring, and be able to adapt as new, you know, options come up, new rules come up, new, you know, business requirements come up. And that's really having that understanding eliminates all those fears. And that's why I can, you know, sit here and share these stories, because I've seen just the fear take over a program, and programs never get started out of fear. And that doesn't need to be the case. They can, you know, soar as a result of being the only organization in the market or the only vendor in the market that is addressing those fears and offering these programs to their participants.
Right. Don't fear the change, right? It's understanding it.
Yep.
And then it can become that competitive edge, or that extra edge on the competitor, or the extra edge you need to get to market quicker and more effectively. So that was a good explanation. Lucy, how are we looking? I know we've spent the last 50 minutes discussing this. Any more questions?
No, that's it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Again, this is first of a series, and we're going to focus on a single subject and try to answer as many questions as possible and make it as compact as possible, even though we spent some time going through this topic, but it's very important. So we have a couple of key action items that we want to leave everybody with. And the first one being, again, don't fear this change. It sounds like a lot of work. Begin to understand it, and it can become a great tool in your kit to becoming more competitive in the marketplace. And the first thing that you have to do is just clearly identify what your goals are, what's the objective for the program, for the business, and clearly articulate that vision. And second to that is compliance. Again, it can be a competitive advantage. And third, making sure that you find the right tools, based on the goals that you want to achieve. Align that with the right tool out there, and there's so many different options and so much different opportunities for organizations to adapt a solution. So,
and Paul, I would say ask for help, right? You are not expected to know everything. ask for help. There's lots of people out there. As I said, for me, it's second nature, but I'm not the normal person. I've been doing this in my entire career. So ask for help. It's okay, and they can be addressed.
Awesome. And the next webinar in our series will be all about closing the gap between sales and marketing when running your channel incentive programs. So, we're going to show you very much how you can align this through using very relevant data, taking out the guesswork, and again, the next step in improving your program. So watch out for that registration in the next few days. And I hope everyone enjoys the long weekend, for those in the US and Canada.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.